The Northtown News Magazine is brought to you in part by eVoter. eVoter is proud to be a sponsor of the Northtown News Magazine.
Hi, I'm Marty Levinson. Welcome to the Northtown Neighborhood News Magazine.
Hi, I'm Marty Levinson. Welcome to the Northtown News Magazine.
Hi, I'm Marty Levinson, and welcome to the Northtown News Magazine.
Come on, baby, don't you wanna go? Come on.
Hi, I'm Marty Levinson. Welcome to the Northtown News Magazine show with the best cameraman around, Sonny Hirsch, and your host, Avi Myers.
Thank you, Marty. Avi Myers here, Northtown Neighborhood News Magazine, a presentation of Sonny Hirsch and myself. By the way, I did get a great haircut from Marty. I got to tell you, and those of you who know me will not be surprised, I've got 2 hairbrushes in this room. I haven't found either one for over a week. Okay, we actually film in my dining room. Dial us up on the World Wide Web, ntnm.org. Hey, we've been doing great on the web. So far this year, and by the way, this is as of our filming date. In the first 2 months of the year, about 15,000 of you, okay, watched shows on YouTube. And imagine if we ever get porn, how many more of you would watch? So we'll try to work on that. Anyway, community policing, I can't emphasize how important community policing is. We've got a really great commander in 24 right now, Michael Wick. He's been doing an absolutely terrific job. I want to urge you guys to come to the community policing meetings. By the way, in 2412, they're actually shorter meetings than usual because there's not enough crime to warrant a long meeting. So you can really get in and out in like 30, 35, 40 minutes, get the whole report on the neighborhood. You can meet the cops that patrol the streets that you live on. And there's sergeants, and sometimes even you can meet the lieutenant or the commander. You never know, but please show up at your community policing meetings. In any event, one of the things that, there's a lot of side benefits to this show. So absolutely, one of the things that everybody absolutely has to get is something from the law offices of James P. Nally at 8 South Michigan. And actually, just to show you guys, I don't know if you can get this much of a zoom, this is all I use for the TV show, and it's what I use every year. So today right here, we've got like Bernie Stone 2 o'clock, Rabbi Doug 2:45, Rabbi Pinchas Eisenbach 3:30, Jim Nally at 4 o'clock, Alderman Joe Moore 4:45, and Ari Friedman's coming after work, which will be somewhere around 5:30. But anyway, this is a really great book to have, and we have to talk about my neighbor across the street afterwards, by the way.
Okay.
So in any event, I'm talking about somebody who is definitely the leading election lawyer in the history of the world. Well, I don't know about the history of the world, but I got to do a new title every time. And but definitely the city of Chicago, state of Illinois, Jim Nally. Jim, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Avi, and thanks for having me.
First of all, my pleasure. And you know what? You think we ought to talk about? What do you want to talk about?
Well, you know what? I would like to just say a quick thing, if I could. A very good friend of mine and somebody that's, speaking of the great election lawyers, Mike Lavelle, who was recognized as the dean of the election bar in the state of Illinois and really nationally, I think, did pass away the end of December. And I just wanted to note that. Mike was, besides being a great lawyer, was just a wonderful person, and one of the rarest of birds, a South Side native who was a Cubs fan.
So am I.
Well, that's what I said. You know the feeling. So.
Yeah, no, definitely. And,
but
you know what? I remember we were at an event one time, and Mike Lavelle passed his drink ticket on to you. It was a political event. I remember that.
Yeah, Mike had to go somewhere.
And that wasn't that long ago.
No, and Mike was just a wonderful person, and he certainly taught me and probably everybody else who practices election law that area of the law. And you'll find his name on every case of importance in the area of election law. So I just wanted to really, recognize Mike's passing. Again, extend my condolences to his family, and just, let everybody know we've lost the true giant of election practice here in Illinois, and he'll always be remembered fondly.
And no, I do. I never had the privilege of meeting him, but no, I certainly read his name more than a number of occasions. You also reminded me that I forgot on the earlier Bernie Stone show. I wanted to give my condolences to Mitch Stein's family. And, Jeff Stein I know very well, and he was a terrific state's attorney, and now he's in private practice. And Of course, Mitch was an important part of the 50th Ward organization for a long number of years, and was involved also as a business liaison to the community through the city of Chicago. And he did a lot of good things, and I do want to acknowledge his passing. And it's, every time I try to do that with Bernie Stone, Bernie gets me off the topic so quick.
Well, and
I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, basically, we just wind up talking.
Yeah. Well, Mitch was a wonderful, good old friend of mine. I hadn't seen him much in recent years, but I learned of his passing, unfortunately, after services had been held. But I do want to extend my heartfelt sympathy to his family. And he certainly leaves a wonderful legacy in his two boys. They've turned out to be wonderful young men, and both very public service oriented, and
Absolutely.
And they're a great reflection on Mitch and Barbara as kids.
So, want to talk about the election at all?
Well, sure. Which one?
Well, actually, we could talk about the one. One of the people. What struck you? I mean, is there anything in particular that really struck you want to talk about?
Well, I think two things struck me. I think, and they're interrelated, I believe. First of all, was with the amount of dissatisfaction that people are expressing about government and the way things are going. I was extremely surprised at the record low turnout in terms of voter turnout. In that you heard people, every time you'd stop and have coffee somewhere, people would be complaining about the government and how it's not being run right. And here was their opportunity to choose the people who are going to be running in November to take over these various offices. And you barely got 25% of the electorate out.
It was unbelievable. I want to tell you, after the election, I was speaking to a mutual friend of ours, Dennis Fleming, who ran for judge in the 9th Sub-Circuit. And Dennis said when he went to vote in the morning, and he saw how few people voted, and he lives around Devon and Central, which is an Irish neighborhood, which should be the heart of support for him among other people along those lines politically, and he saw how few people voted. He knew he was dead right on the spot.
Well, and I think that the second thing that I found interesting was part of the reason I think that contributed somewhat to the low turnout was that we are having these primaries on February 2nd, which is, if people remember, the primary was always the third Tuesday in March for generations. And they changed the date in 2008 because there was a feeling that Illinois was being left out of the presidential primaries, and by the time that we voted in March, these decisions as far as nominating presidential candidates were made. But what it's really shown is that holding the primary that early, there's just not enough time for people to come off of the holiday season. You've got people from Thanksgiving to New Year's who are more interested, quite rightly so, in doing things with their families. You've got Thanksgiving, you've got Hanukkah, you've got Christmas, you've got New Year's. People are watching football games, so that this campaign was really a 30-day campaign.
Yeah, and as a matter of, if the Bears would have been like in serious playoff consideration, it would have been even worse.
Right.
And you know what? I think there's an awful lot of people who are going to spend an awful lot of time feeling really, really sorry for some of the people that came out ahead who should not have come out ahead. Whether it's an unqualified judge, and I'm not going to get too specific, but it's a shame. It's really a shame. Now I got to tell you, be honest, from my standpoint, I never had a more successful election issue to Chicago. So I mean, it worked out great for me, but.
Well, it was tougher on the candidates because I think the candidates all felt like they had they had 4 weeks basically to get their message out. So it probably was good in terms of all the media. I'm sure there were record numbers of commercials purchased and ads purchased and things.
Ads on TV, it's kind of funny because I was looking at the other two Jewish papers. I had about 16 or 17 pages of advertising politically, and the other two Jewish newspapers put together had, I think, 3, maybe 3.5.
Well, Avi, your publication has stood the test of time, and people really look to it, whether you're Jewish or not. I have a lot of friends who look at it, and when they're looking at races, they want to read about candidates, because you do present a good exposition of people's positions. You may be critical, you may be complimentary, but people, after they finish reading it, know who the candidate is and some of the key issues on which they've taken positions.
Well, thank you. You know what? One of my favorite compliments was I was over at a place called the Emerald Isle on Peterson for a political event. Nice Jewish bar. In any event, people were calling up to me and saying, "Boy, you really did a great job of distributing the paper. All these Irish guys picked it up. They knew about it."
Well, I think people were interested or trying to get interested. I think the clock just ran out, and that's the problem when you're holding a primary that early. Even the people who are saying, "Yeah, I would like to find out more about the candidates," maybe people felt like because there wasn't enough time to get to know about the candidates, they felt like, I don't want to go out and vote if I don't know who I'm voting for. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some very serious buyer's remorse. Not to mention the length of the season now for us to rip apart the Democratic and Republican winners from February to November. I mean, if the press is doing their job, they're going to have everybody ripped apart in that much time.
Well, part of the problem is, though, as you know, in Cook County, is that oftentimes the primary decides the general election, and certainly most of the judicial races in Cook County will be unopposed. Whoever won the Democratic judicial primary for an office.
There was only one race where there were, and actually 2 Republicans ran in the same race.
Yeah, it's unusual. So that, for a lot of offices at the county or local level, the primary was the election. And the fact that people didn't vote, you're not going to get a second bite of the apple in November. You're going to walk into that polling place and you're going to see a lot of these offices uncontested because the primary decided who the candidate would be. And that's sad because, as you point out, there may be somebody that if you had the opportunity to vote, or you'd taken advantage of the opportunity, I should say, you would have chosen someone else. But on the other hand, if you don't participate, you're not really in a real strong position to complain about the outcome.
No, absolutely not. I want to tell you, after what happened, especially in Massachusetts, electing a guy like Scott Brown, and those people knew what they were doing. They were basically rejecting, an agenda they didn't want, specifically things like health insurance. I really thought you'd see something stronger along those. I thought you'd see more people voting, but everybody was warning about low turnout, and it was.
It happened. Well, there are several bills in the legislature now to push the primary back again, and I think one of them is going to pass. There's a bill right now to change it back to March as the way it has been. That probably is the one that has the best opportunity to be passed. But there are other bills competing out there saying move the primary to April, move it to June. There are even some saying move it to like August so that you wouldn't have a real long period of time between the primary and the general election. So we'll see how that hashes out in the legislature. But I do think more than likely there will be a change in the law to move the primaries back to March.
We actually had the earliest primary in the nation.
That's correct. So I think everybody has probably recognized that the February primary just didn't work very well for a lot of reasons. Now, whether that will goose turnout the next time around, we'll find out when it's in March of
actually,
2012.
the only real beneficiary that I know of the early election was me, because I couldn't believe how well the paper did. And thank you very much, everybody.
Well, and I think you'll do fine no matter when the election is. But that's something that I think that everybody has recognized now. It just did not give people enough time to learn about the candidates. It didn't give people enough time to pick up momentum as candidates where the voters were getting energized and wanting to come out and vote. And that's why you had a record low turnout.
Yeah. Any desire to talk about the lieutenant governor's race?
Well, actually, I think probably the most interesting thing to come out of that is the fact that there's now a movement in the legislature to abolish the office of lieutenant governor. So I think that's really, really interesting that as a result of an election and the aftermath of that election where the candidate resigned the nomination, it caused people to look at a more fundamental issue and say, well, why do we have a lieutenant governor to begin with?
Yeah, well, let me ask you. Some people are saying that, and of course I always like to point at Mike Madigan on the show, but some people are saying that, well, Lisa Madigan would become the next governor if, I don't think Quinn's going to get indicted. He might be a little incompetent, but I don't think he's indictable.
I don't think people are, to be fair, I don't think people are talking about it in terms of just benefiting any one person, because what they're talking about is a constitutional amendment to abolish the office. You would have to do that. It's a constitutional office. So the legislature is talking about setting up the framework so that could be on the ballot in November. the person who would win the office this time could not be deprived of the office, so it wouldn't be effective until 2014. But come the 2014 election, there would be no office of lieutenant governor to run for. And that's a structural change, so that 20 years from now, whoever the attorney general might be would be the next person in line if that change were made.
Yeah, it's interesting that I have mixed feelings about that particular subject. I guess one thing I do want to say, and I've said it on other shows too, and I'm talking for myself right now, is I honestly do feel that despite things weren't handled right in a lot of ways, I think Scott Cohn really, really meant to do a good job. And I think, and he presented the opportunity up front. He mentioned the incident. It could have been looked at. I think it actually was looked at, and I actually think that it was the powers that be in Springfield that looked to really do him in after he won, because I think he had a sincere desire to do some good things for the state, and I think that's something that a lot of people just don't want to see.
And I think one thing that Scott picked up on was I think he felt that there was a movement out there where people didn't want just, say, a career politician. They wanted somebody, and he certainly had never run for or served in any public office before that. And I think, I think when you look at the entire situation, you're right. He did. I think the day he announced his candidacy, he mentioned this incident that had taken place and put it out there, and the press, frankly, who normally go out there and vet everything and publish things, a lot of things which aren't even correct.
That's an understatement, not correct.
But
Mark Brown did write 2 columns about it, and anybody could have read about it too and checked into it further.
But the press is an institution. I mean, Mark Brown wrote a couple of columns, but did anybody else write about it or talk about it? No, I wasn't aware of it.
And you know what gets me too is the fact that everybody knew he was a pawnbroker before, and all of a sudden he's referred to as a pawnbroker, and pawnbroker becomes a dirty word afterwards. He's a third-generation pawnbroker. He inherited the business from his father and his grandfather. And you know what? Even though it may not be the most pristine-looking business, if you run the place in a proper and honorable manner, it could be okay. I mean, there is a need for that sort of thing.
With Scott Cohn, I don't think anybody ever made any allegations that, as far as his business, that there was any impropriety or that he was doing anything that was wrong. That look, it's an honest legal occupation, and obviously there's a need out there for it, or there wouldn't be pawnbroker shops out there.
And I know myself from community policing that a lot of pawn shops actually go out of their way to cooperate with the police department when they're given stuff, and people are caught by trying to give the wrong things to pawn shops.
Well, I think that I was reading comments by a lot of people after this suddenly became a big issue, and I think you have to give the mayor credit. The mayor basically said, look, this man was not convicted of anything. There was a charge, and the charge was dismissed. And he basically said, so is the standard now going to be if you're ever accused of something, you can't seek a public office?
You know what? I so agree with that.
I think he was right on.
Agree. Yeah, absolutely. And you know something, too? Even if the guy did these horrible things, let's say he was guilty of the stuff 5 years ago, which I think is questionable. There was obviously problems with his behavior. Then he was going through a divorce. He was taking the steroids and all that. But the fact of the matter is that doesn't mean he can't try to do good. That means he's guilty for the rest of his life, for a bad period in his life. I mean, I would think that because of that period, he had a genuine desire to do well. I really do. I thought he meant well, and I'm just speaking for me, but you know what? I was really sorry to see him resign. And I don't think he's ever going to be able to run for anything ever again.
Well, what's sad is he won it fair and square. He went out there and he matched up with career politicians who had, significant political backing, and certainly had the experience that he didn't have. And I thought he ran a very well run campaign. I think his campaign, Granger Terry, Phil Malfacey, who put together his campaign, I think did an excellent job in terms of really setting him apart from the crowd. He really made job creation a big issue, and he did something about it. He held job fairs, and people were invited, and people got jobs. And so I think that he came out with a very strong message, and it resonated, obviously.
Yeah, he definitely. And you know what? The fact is, I really think he was looking to do well. And how often do you actually hear a politician looking to do good things? It was a positive thing. He wasn't necessarily ripping up, his opponents or anything. He was talking about good things that he could do and things that could help the state. And the whole situation is a shame. It really is. Well, anyway, you know what? There's other stuff. Let me. Well, what else about the election?
Well, again, I think that the single biggest thing was the lack of turnout, and I think that that is going to cause a change back to a March primary date.
Yeah, are there any races you're already focusing in on for the fall, or?
Not really. There's been some. Actually, the most interesting thing is we may have a couple of recounts, although I think there's the possibility, as we're speaking here, we don't have the final numbers on the Republican governor's race, but it appears that Bill Brady is going to be ahead by several hundred votes, whatever the actual number
Now,
is.
by the way, this is the right person to talk to about recounts and things because, I mean, Jim actually handles situations where votes are recounted. And now,
Well, in full disclosure, I've been contacted by the Brady campaign, so if there would be a recount, I'd be on board working with them. But that may or may not happen. Kirk Dillard, who is the person who's trailing right now as we speak, has indicated that unless the margin falls somewhere around 100, he didn't think he'd pursue it.
now is that because now in the old days, I mean, one precinct could get you 100 soiled votes. I mean, presidents of the United States have changed in the state of Illinois due to interesting doings.
As much as people joke about it, Avi,
Yeah.
the technical aspects of our election system now have gotten a lot better. So in terms of counting the votes, that is really a lot more accurate than it had been in the past. So you're not going to find as many errors that would lead to a change. And keep in mind on a recount, if there are always going to be errors in an election. People are people, and there's going to be human error no matter what. They'll mark a ballot incorrectly. But there's errors on both sides. So when you do a recount, it's not just going to be where the person who's behind says, oh, I found all these votes that get me ahead. You're going to find votes that were for the person who was behind that are going to go to the other candidate as well. So it's not a zero-sum game where only one person picks up votes or loses votes. It happens on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was an election judge, which is about 30 years ago, the judges were elected on paper ballots that we had to count by hand. We were there till 5 or 6 in the morning. Now you're talking about pushing buttons on a computerized machine that spits out countouts. So it would sound to me like it would have to be a little more.
I can just tell you from experience, 2 years ago I was involved in a recount in a judicial sub-circuit, and the margin was around 400 votes, and it didn't change that much, when all was said and done.
It is definitely more accurate, and I do think that. Well, you know what? I'm not. I don't know if the desire of all the people. I do remember in the days of the old machine, seeing very interesting things happen when I was poll watching.
Well, and I think sometimes when people look at a recount, some of those residual things, those historical things that may or may not have happened or may have been embellished when they did happen, are still in people's minds. But the technology is at a point now where you really. I'm not saying that there couldn't be fraud, but there are a lot of safeguards to prevent at least massive fraud or systematic fraud. And just in terms of the accuracy of the count, the technology has also gotten better on that.
I know in more than one precinct, at least 2 different precincts in the 50th ward, and this is many years ago. The minute I or a different poll watcher, who were usually sick on some of the top people, would go to the washroom, 25 people would vote during that time.
Well, I think when you're looking at it nowadays, though, because of technological advances, and there are a lot of checks and balances on that, I think that the other thing to keep in mind is that the in-precinct voting, I think, is going to become less and less prevalent. You look at the early voting totals. The interesting thing about this last cycle is the first time we had what people call no-fault absentee voting, where in the past, if you wanted to cast an absentee ballot, you'd have to fill out an affidavit saying that you're going to be out of town, or that you had some medical condition that prevented you from going to the polls, or there was a religious reason. You had to give some reason of several categories. This last time around, for the first time, you can vote absentee now, and could have in this February election, simply by filling out a form saying, send me an absentee ballot.
That's pretty cool. And let me ask you, what percentage of the vote came early and from absentee compared to people that actually voted on election day?
It's up now around 20%.
That high?
Yeah, and it's getting higher every election.
You know what? That's one of the reasons I came out with Jewish Chicago right around the start of early voting. For specifically, it bothered me that people had already voted before the paper came out.
Well, that's kind of interesting, and it gets back to the idea with this low turnout and people maybe not with a 30-day election, basically not having enough time. it really was less than a 30-day election because this cycle, people could start early voting January 10th. So if we're talking about nobody was really paying attention to the election until after New Year's, within a week of that almost, people were voting. And therefore, there was not a lot of time, if you're a candidate, to get your message out.
Yeah, I remember, as a matter of fact, I don't know if it was 2 years ago or 4 years ago, there was a candidate who was legitimately soiled before the election, but after a lot of the early voters had voted.
Right.
They couldn't react accordingly.
I think the early voting is going to become more and more prevalent. You look at a state like Oregon now, that actually they had a mail voting system, where you mail in your ballot, similar to this no-fault absentee thing that you can do here now. But basically, they're down to like 80% of their vote is cast by mail, and on election day, they don't even have precinct polling places. They might have like one per ward.
Wow.
Similar to what we do with early voting now. And if you don't want to vote by mail, then you can go to one of these polling centers that are located, throughout the area and vote there.
Oh, let me ask you, I know that in this particular ward, the voting places were undermanned like crazy. Alderman Stone was telling me he went to 25 different polling places and there were only really precinct workers in 3 of them. Was that more of a citywide phenomenon?
Yeah, absolutely. This whole thing about, the machine and that is really, again, we're talking about things of the past. There are very few political organizations now that can put a person in every precinct all day to, meet voters and hand out cards or whatever.
Mm-hmm. You know what? Before the show, we were talking about the idea of putting an inspector general on the alderman. You want to talk about that at all?
Well, Alderman Moore might want to talk about that when you have him on.
Oh, I'll ask him. And by the way, he's sitting in the living room right now. He'll be one of the
That's
next
right.
guests.
I might defer to him as what you would call a real party in interest. I don't have any horse in that race.
No, okay. What you see any other changes coming about as a result of this election?
Well, yeah, I think, again, I see that we'll move the date back, which should be good. That way then, if you got a March date, early voting would be starting, say, the end of February. You'd have a good, solid couple of months for candidates to really get their campaign in gear, get their message out for voters to learn about them. The second thing, as I said, is I see early voting becoming more and more prevalent each election cycle. And I'd be surprised within 5 years, I'm going to bet that better than 50% of the vote will be cast either through early voting or no-fault absentee. This no-fault absentee is really great. The ballot will be, you send in the form and the ballot is mailed to your home. So you can sit at your kitchen table with a cup of coffee and take your time and, review the paper endorsements or review, literature from the candidates and cast your ballot and then mail it back in.
No, that I got to tell you, I like that whole idea. I know when my mom was alive and she voted absentee, it was kind of, it was her, believe me, she made her own decisions. There's no question about it. But you know what? It gave me a chance to look at the ballot early and actually for just me to think about what it was before I actually was going to vote on Election Day.
I think one of the other things you might see coming down the line is a consolidation of the election authority so that, right now, early voting, for instance, if you live in the city, you can go to any one of the early voting stations within the city and vote. So you can be in the 50th ward and go to the station in the 37th ward to vote if you want. But you can't do that city suburban. So if you happen to work in Skokie, you can't go somewhere in Skokie and cast a ballot. You have to get back into Chicago, and vice versa. The suburban voters who work in the city couldn't go to, say, the 50th ward, at Warren Park and vote there. And I think you'll probably see, technological changes that will eventually, I would think you might be able to go anywhere in the state. And if you're in Springfield, you could, cast a vote if you happen to be in Chicago.
One of the most confusing things on election night, and I really wanted to go to a particular party, I just wasn't feeling up to it that night, I stayed home. If I wanted to know the results in a number of the races, I actually had to go to both the city site and the suburban site and tally it up together, and it got pretty confusing. And we've only got about a half a minute left, so I'll give you the closing word.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm talking about. I think the technology is there where that could be merged, that data could be merged, and if the data can be merged, you could, make it easier for people to cast their ballots no matter where they're at.
And I think that's important, not to mention the CTA and PACE ought to merge on the one-day bus pass, which I used to use all the time because I live near the edge of the city. I want to thank very much my guest, Jim Nally, leading election lawyer. I want to thank my entire technical crew, Sonny Hirsch. Jim, it's always a pleasure. I didn't even acknowledge the fact that it was great to do the live election show with you this year.
It was a lot of fun.
And a lot of fun, and a lot of people watched, and we thank you for all of that. And check us on the web, ntnm.org. And thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.